Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And I put out this video the other day on how to read trout water. I also put out a previous video on casting a nymph to a rising trout. And one of the issues that occurred to me afterwards was, well, maybe I should look at a video on casting angles and how we should approach a fish. Which direction should we cast? All those kinds of decisions. And I was thinking, I could do a video with a bunch of different fish being caught from different angles, but really it boils down to two things. And so it wasn't much point in doing that because we can really apply the same two fundamentals to any situation. The first thing we want to do when we see a fish, whether it's rising or we just happen to see it, and we want to put a cast into it, is we have to first ask the question, how do we want that fly to approach that fish? A dry fly, that's fairly simple. You want a dead drift going across the window of the fish. But when you get into nymphs, wets, and streamers, it's a little bit more complicated. And so you have to think of how that fly is going to look to that fish at that moment. The fish is facing upstream. So if you are casting upstream with the dry and you drift the fly across its window, that's good. If you're fishing a wet, a streamer, or a nymph, changes things. And you may need to go upstream of the fish and cast downstream. Now, about how that fly looks, whether it's a nymph, streamer, or a wet fly, if you're going to add motion to the fly, you're going to make it move. You don't want the fly going at the fish. A prey item doesn't charge a predator. It's better to have it either broadside or the tail end of the fly looking at the fish. So that when the fish looks at the fly, it sees the tail of the fly, not the head. So it looks like the insect or the bait fish, whatever it is trying to get away from it. So when you're presenting, you have to think, how do I want that fly to look to the fish? That controls our angle. So in this other video that I have on casting a nymph to a rising trout, we'll take a look at it and see the decision making I went through in order for me to pick my spot. Okay, so I'm running my nymph down that foam line when I see that rise off to the right. And I know I can't get a cast to that fish from this angle. I've got overhanging sticks, I've got shallow water on either side of the fish, and the angle that the fly would approach the fish would be wrong too. In fact, it would see the leader first, which is something I try to avoid when I'm drifting a nymph to a fish. Rather than run over there immediately and try to get a cast in there, I continue to fish that run and just think about where I want to stand and how I want to put that fly in there. Okay, I've decided what I'm going to do. I'm just going to move upstream just slightly above where that fish is located. So I'm casting almost across the stream, just slightly above the fish. So you can see what went down there, how I deliberately chose a position to put that fly to that fish based on what I wanted that fly to do. The second thing that we want to talk about is current. What is the current going to do to our line between us and where the fish is? You can see that foam line represents slightly stronger currents. And so I have to make a couple of ranging casts just to see how that current is going to play out. As it turns out, it didn't make any difference. But I tested it first with a couple of ranging casts before I decided to put the fly in there to the fish. Okay, now that I have a sense of the current and decided on the angle, I'm prepared to put my cast into the fish, and I hooked the little guy. Very satisfying. Even though it's not a big fish, it's very satisfying to take the time to solve the problem and figure out the cast you need to put the fly to the fish. And that's what it's all about. So you're going to make those two decisions when you see a fish and you want to put a cast to it. What is my fly going to look like when it goes by the fish? And what is the current going to do to my line when I try to make that presentation? And when you think of those two things, you can then work out, you can solve the problem, you can then work out what angle you have to cast that fly to that fish and what kind of mend you might have to use to control the drift. So with those two things in mind, you can handle pretty well any situation, you know. And keep in mind, you just don't cast a fly as soon as you see a fish. Go, oh, it's a fish over there. You know, you likely won't get the fish, and you'll probably put it down. Stop, think, take your time, and go, okay, I've got a streamer on here. How do I want that streamer to look to that fly, to that fish, sorry. How am I going to present that? Fast, slow, high, low, butt in, broadside. You go through that thinking process before you make the cast. And then you say to yourself, what is the current going to do to my line? Can I take advantage of it? Can I get a better presentation by using the current? These are the thought processes you go through. So, what's the fly going to look like? What's the current going to do to my line? Those two things will help you make a much better presentation. Cheers.